and welcome to the Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and this is going to be a one thing you need to know video about cutting Phalaenopsis bloom spikes. Now, as with most things orchids, you know, sometimes there really isn't just one thing you need to know, but a couple of related things that go along with that one thing. So I will be making this video just the tiniest bit longer to explain some of the other things that go along with Phalaenopsis spikes. Now, this particular orchid was in a previous video where I gave a lot of detailed information about the secondary spikes that can develop from the original primary spikes on a Phalaenopsis orchid. And at the end of this video, I will put a link to that one because you may want to go back and see how this plant looked many months ago and why the secondary bloom spikes even developed, because typically I don't encourage my orchids to do this. But in any case, what you can see now is that the blooms are dropping. Now, these are the blooms from the secondary spike that developed from the primary. And so 3 blooms were on top of the countertop this morning. And you can see at the top of the plant that there are 2 more that have wilted. And this happened rather rapidly. Within just a matter of 2 or 3 days, it went from a spike that was looking, you know, pretty okay to one that has completely wilted blooms. So if you go back and watch that other video and from the link at the end of this one, you'll see how I described the secondary spikes developing from the original primary spike. This was the only one that developed and bloomed. There was potential for a secondary spike right here, but this never developed. It kind of just stalled out. And this orchid is sort of completely experimental for the purposes of, you know, making videos. So what we're going to do today is we're going to cut the spike that had the secondary spike on it, and it's also the spike that is yellowing from the top down, which is completely normal. And this is the one we're going to cut. And then I'm going to save this one to show you something else with Phalaenopsis bloom spikes, and that'll be in another video. Okay, so we're just working with this one today that had this secondary spike develop from it and actually produce the blooms. Okay, so the first thing to know is that once this yellowing starts from the top down, it will just continue all the way down the spike until the entire thing is dead, at which point really the only option is to cut it away. There are some sources that believe you should allow that to happen because the orchid is reabsorbing the energy that is in this spike. You know, I don't know if anybody has ever actually measured whether or not that is something that is, you know, all that noticeable. But, you know, I just really don't think that there's much advantage to allowing this to completely die before cutting it. And this orchid, you know, has already kind of done a lot. In the time that I've had it, it probably hasn't had much, if any, new root growth, and it certainly hasn't produced any new vegetative growth, you know, at the top of the plant. So we're going to be cutting this spike, and I'm just removing the clips from the stake. That might be a little bit off camera, but I'm just taking the clips off, and I'm pulling the stake out, and this is the one we're going to be cutting. Now, what I want to do so that we can make sure we're really seeing what's happening is I'm going to clear away some of this sphagnum moss from the base of this plant, because I want to make sure that the camera can actually see where we're cutting. Some very strange things that you find buried in the sphagnum. Okay. So, when you have decided to cut the entire spike, which is the decision I always make for the benefit of the overall plant, you want to find the node that developed right above the base of the plant. Okay, so the spike came from down here and it grew up, and this is the first node, and you can recognize the node because it has like a little bitty bract protecting it. It's also like the bud point, or maybe like the eye along the spike. And so you want to find that first node and you want to cut it just a little bit above that. Now these cutters have already been flamed. I did that before I started filming. You want to make sure you have sanitized cutters, and you want to make sure your cutters are sharp. Okay, and now this bloom spike is removed and we just throw that part away. And the reason why you want to cut a little bit above this node is because some sources will tell you that this node acts as part of the orchid's immune system, okay? And if there were to be any sort of bacteria or disease or problem get in through this cut point, this node has some of the plant's immune system in it, and it has a better chance of fighting off whatever the pathogen is and keeps it from traveling down the spike into the rest of the plant. Now, whether or not that's 100% true, I'm not personally certain, but I have read that. And so now that we have this cut here, you want to get a little bit of cinnamon on your finger and go ahead and just touch that on the cut. It's a desiccant. It will help that wound dry, and it's also a little bit of antibacterial properties in cinnamon. Okay, so that's all we need to do for that one. And if by chance any of the cinnamon gets on the leaves or on the roots, then you want to make sure to wipe or wash that away. All right, so that's all you need to know for cutting bloom spikes. It is that time of year right now where some of the early blooming Phalaenopsis orchids probably need to have their spikes cut if you don't want to encourage the secondary spikes. And you know, if you learned something new today or just enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and the subscribe button is coming up in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching. Lots of orchid videos to come. 'Tis the season. Talk to you next time.